I think before I start it's important that I point out that I, like many Australians, believe that Prime Minister Julia Gillard misled Australians about a carbon tax. So this is not in any way a defence of the Prime Minister's recent backflip on this issue or an endorsement of the ALP's policy on the issue. But irrespective of how the Prime Minister's backflip is conceived in the public arena, there is still something that has to be taken into account here. She is the Prime Minister of Australia, and while ever she holds that position, she is entitled to the respect that the office warrants. That is why it was absolutely disgraceful last week to hear the manner in which 2GB shock jock Alan Jones spoke to the Prime Minister on his morning program. I don't listen to the Jones program. My attention was drawn to the interview by a friend, so I reluctantly visited the 2GB site to have a listen. Jones began by berating the Prime Minister for being late for her interview on his program, and as she tried to explain she was busy, he snapped, "Well, we're all busy." His tirade prompted the Sydney Morning Herald political journalist Philip Corey to write that Jones actually levelled his own schedule's importance with that of the Prime Minister's. Sadly, Jones would actually believe that to be the case. Jones kept calling her Julia, and at one stage informing her that people are now calling her Julia. How she resisted not to use her far greater intellect to let him have it was actually a credit to the Prime Minister. It's high time that politicians in this country learned how to deal with this wimp. There were two very senior government ministers during the Howard years that were not afraid of this weirdo. One in particular refused to be interviewed by Jones for many years. Despite Howard's request, the minister stood his ground. Another was the subject of tireless tirades from the parrot during her ministership, which culminated in the threat of legal action. This minister too stood her ground when carpeted by Howard, and the endless bagging stopped, and had it not, the matter would have gone further. Jones has a somewhat checkered history when his comments have been taken to task legally, and while he did not defame the Prime Minister in last week's interview, he belittled her, spoke over the top of her, as he is wont to do, as he cannot bear more than 10 seconds without the sound of his own voice. Politicians should take a leaf out of the Daily Telegraph racing journalist Kenny Callender's book. Jones took him to task last year on an issue, and Kenny, someone who actually really does know where Struggle Street is and what being fair dinkum is all about, was anything but shy in his response. Referring to last week's interview, Channel 9 and Daily Telegraph political honcho Laurie Oakes wrote that Jones has increasingly become the godfather of the Liberal Party of New South Wales. If this is the case, it's been a highly unsuccessful relationship. For all his misguided belief that the great majority of people in this state share his views, as indicated by the wankerish polls on his website, all his ranting and pontifications over many years have not been sufficient to convince the real majority of New South Welshmen that we should have a Liberal government. With the most inept government in this state that the country has probably ever seen, Jones has still not been able to convince the people of New South Wales that Liberals should be elected into Parliament. It is 16 years since they were in government. Just maybe he's an albatross to the Liberal Party rather than a benefit. Bet some of the right-wingers in the Liberal Party hadn't thought of that. Perhaps this was not lost on the pre-selectors all those years ago when they overlooked Jones for another candidate. Perhaps Jones is all Christina Keneally's got going for the upcoming state election. Who knows? But politicians of any ilk should not fear Jones. In fact, they should wake up each morning relishing the task of knocking him down to size. I always recall seeing him brought to the stage where he was speechless by the infamous Chopper Read on the Kerry-Ann Kennelly program some years back, and remember his noted absence during the early days when Jonestown was published. Jones has every right to be a tough interviewer, but he has no right to be rude, condescending, schoolmarmish and repetitive when he's talking to the Prime Minister of Australia. Who Jones thinks he is of no real relevance, because there are a great many people in this country who have a view that is entirely different to his on that issue. And politicians should start treating him exactly for what he is, a mere shock jock, not some pillar of society that is to be feared. Into him. Let's see what he's made of. And let's see what the pollies are made of, because Jones is there to be got.